Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on the 7th of November. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by calling us here at 1-800-472-0391. That's your Alaska Weather Information line. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. Get updates pushed to your phone through Facebook and Twitter, NWS Alaska on Facebook and also on Twitter, but you can also subscribe to local alerts and feeds from each one of the Weather Service offices here in Alaska, NWS Anchorage, NWS Fairbanks, or NWS Juneau on Twitter. If you can't find what you're looking for on our websites, on social media, on our Alaska Weather TV show, please let me know. I'm happy to help you and serve you any way I possibly can. david.snider@noaa.gov is how you find me. Hazardous weather out there tonight. That includes snow for northern parts of the Panhandle. It looks like the next weather event is going to bring in some more accumulating snow across northern parts of the Panhandle starting tonight and especially going through at least midday tomorrow for the areas around Haines, where you could see about 4 to 6 inches of snow, and as much as 6 to 10 inches of snow around the Klondike Highway. A winter weather advisory is in effect for the Klondike from now until about 6 o'clock tomorrow night. So snow is coming, and again for the Haines and Klondike Highway regions, that means you. For the capital city, it looks like you have a better chance of seeing rain, maybe a little rain-snow mix tonight and tomorrow, but generally speaking is going to be more wet weather than white weather at this point, though it has been cold. And more wind for all parts of southeast, though no warnings, watches, or advisories are posted for any wind conditions right now. As we look up to the north and west, we're still dealing with what's finishing up across the northwestern coast and the lower Kobuk and upper Kobuk and lower Noatak and upper Noatak valleys, all dealing with more accumulating snow through the remainder of the afternoon. As we go through the rest of the evening hours and by the time we finish the show, weather should be beginning to improve across northwestern Alaska. So change is slow, but change is coming, and it looks like the weather will continue to slowly improve as we get into your Thursday. Now, for areas northwest of Ambler, and especially in the lower parts of the valley, we do expect to see some gusty conditions continuing this evening, but that too should improve. Gusts through the remainder of the late afternoon, early evening hours will likely hold up around that 35-mile-per-hour limit there. There is going to be more snow, and there is going to be some more westerly wind coming into the west coast, so here's how we get that set up. Low pressure across the northern Gulf right now is moving towards southeastern Alaska. That's creating a little bit more of a stronger southeasterly flow today. And that barrier jet that we call it, that strong push right along the coast is curling into low pressure right now. So some of the strongest winds and seas will be out there this afternoon and again tomorrow across the northern Gulf and the east. Clouds are overspreading the interior, and in some cases we're going to see snow, it looks like tonight, around the Anchorage region and certainly into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. There is a potential for at least some light amounts of snow, not the amounts that we saw with this most recent snow event. Out across the west, one wave is working through and again leaving snow behind across northwestern parts of Alaska tonight. That should be winding down, and the next weather maker is already in the western Bering. As that pushes eastward fairly quickly, it looks like this is going to bring a healthy surge of first southerly winds ahead of the storm and then westerly winds behind that system. And that again will bring up the seas and bring up the winds and the potential of coastal erosion and maybe some high surf along the coast. So we'll be watching for that to take shape. Low pressure across the northern Gulf this afternoon was listed at 1,003 millibars. High pressure holding across the western Yukon and the interior sat around 1,040 millibars, or just less than that. Low pressure was working across Norton Sound and the southern Seward Peninsula. Snow out ahead of that, and a little bit more of a southerly flow developing quickly behind that. That was working through the Aleutians this afternoon, all wrapping in ahead of the low at 990 millibars. And here's that strong west and northwesterly fetch developing behind it. As we get into tonight, you can see moisture spreading into all parts of southeast. Up north, we expect that to quickly change over to snow if it's not there already. Haines and the Klondike Highway, again, looking at winter weather advisories through noon for Haines and through 6 p.m. tomorrow for the Klondike Highway. Anywhere from about 4 to 6 inches in Haines and 6 to 10 around the Klondike. It looks like generally rain south of that, though. There will be a broad area of convection or upward moving air that could create showers, even a couple thunderstorms across the north and eastern Gulf. Most of that out to sea, so no big concerns for anyone on land. Snow flies across south central and parts of the western Alaska Range down toward Lake Iliamna. Generally light amounts of snow with this, but there may be some stronger gusts heading out toward Kodiak Island and Shelikof Strait tonight. Look for areas of snow across the interior. As that begins to wind down, southerly winds begin to pick up across the west coast, and you can see once again a tight pressure gradient setting up for St. Lawrence Island and all the way southward toward the Pribilofs, and then a sharp change there across the central and eastern Aleutians as that wave presses eastward and moves into the west coast as we get into your Thursday. With that, we're still dealing with southerly flow across parts of the YK Delta, but right behind that is where we're going to start watching for that stronger westerly push that could affect some of our coastal areas with high surf. Watch for some light snow across the North Slope and the Brooks Range, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass there, across the Middle Tanana Valley, and southward hit and miss areas of light snow, that pulling out of the Anchorage region as we go through your Thursday, so quick improvements by the afternoon. Low pressure across the north and eastern Gulf is starting to fill in. There's still that area of convection, so once again we'll be watching for very intermittent areas of thunderstorm activity, if any, but this system does have a history of producing just a little bit of lightning as it's been working through, and then areas of light rain across parts of southeast. That will be the general trend for Thursday, and still relatively breezy there. As we get into Friday, you'll notice southeast is starting to settle down. The winds should not be nearly as tough. Look for areas of showers, maybe a little bit of a rain-snow mix up in the north. Light snow possibilities continue across the Copper River Basin and start to increase across the western parts of Alaska as that south and westerly flow taps into some colder air again. Rain and snow mix across the Norton Sound region, part of the Kuskokwim Delta and the Bristol Bay region. Showers for the central and western chain. And then more snow, it looks like, for many across the north and western sections of Alaska. No warnings, watches, or advisories out for that just yet, but it does look like it'll be a decent setup for snow. And once again, we'll be watching for those winds to move in as we get into Thursday, Friday, maybe Saturday, depending on how long that westerly fetch sets up across the western coast. For southeast tonight, 30s and 40s, fairly mild in Sitka, 40 degrees on the button, 20s and 30s for Prince William Sound and South Central. Homer looking at about 30 tonight, 36 for Kodiak, 7 in Fairbanks, 1 for Arctic Village, teens and 20s for the North Slope, teens and 20s for Kotzebue Sound, and low to mid 20s for Norton Sound. Southwestern coastal villages in the 20s, and the Alaska Peninsula generally above freezing all the way from Port Heiden down towards Sand Point, Cold Bay, False Pass, and 39 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 36 degrees around St. Paul. A high of 42 there tomorrow afternoon. Teens for most areas in the central and eastern interior, 8 in Fort Yukon, 15 for Bettles, 23 in Ambler as conditions improve there, 34 in Nome. Utqiagvik, you're looking at 25 degrees and 40s for most of southeast, some cases pushing 50. Overnight lows on Friday get cold in Fort Yukon down to 2 below, 5 above in Fairbanks, South Central in the 20s, 34 in Kodiak. Looks like many in southeast will see temperatures in the 30s and 40s there, with high temperatures on Friday, warming up in southwest with many highs near 40 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On aviation weather now, we'll have a broad area of convection across the northern parts of the Gulf of Alaska. That means showers and thunderstorms may be possible in the region. We have seen some lightning strikes in the last several days as this system has been moving across, so it won't be a big surprise if that happens some more. Watch for IFR conditions across the northern parts of southeast off the outer coast as well, especially as you head down toward Heidelberg and into the Clarence Strait region around the Dixon entrance. IFR across the north slopes of the Brooks Range and along the next boundary moving across the central and eastern Bering Sea. That will include St. Paul and St. George by tomorrow morning, and for the lower and parts of the middle Yukon Valley. As we go throughout the afternoon, you can see that next wave moving into the western parts of the Alaska's west coast and southwest. Look for IFR to move over Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley up through the Kaktovik region and to Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass. And as you move through the Chugach and into the northern Gulf, look for IFR conditions there. That range of convection or shower and thunderstorm activity will be working north and east toward Yakutat and a little bit closer toward Gustavus as the afternoon goes on. By Friday morning, IFR is fairly widespread through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, into the Yukon Delta and the Kuskokwim Delta region. MVFR is also fairly widespread across the interior. You'll see some breaks around the middle and upper Tanana Valley, and then around the Alaska Range. Look for IFR across northern parts of southeast and around Hyder. Also across parts of the Copper River Valley, widespread MVFR for the Aleutians, most of the Alaska Peninsula and parts of Kodiak Island. By Friday afternoon, another wave working across the western Bering shows up with IFR across St. Matthew, St. Lawrence Island, into the Yukon Delta and the upper Kuskokwim, as well as the Kuskokwim Delta. IFR conditions across the higher terrain of southeast. And some of the MVFR for the Noatak and Kobuk Valley starts to break up a little bit, with MVFR around Point Barrow all the way down toward Wainwright and some of your passes there. Here's your pass conditions for AKwx tomorrow. We're expecting marginal conditions worsening to IFR as the day goes on. Similar conditions are expected around Adigan Pass. Watch for IFR to pass through fairly quickly, so it may be a brief period. But marginal conditions look to be at least most of the day there, with some hit and miss IFR. Marginal conditions through Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. A lot of the worst weather will be a little bit further east throughout the day, like Rainy Pass, IFR to start. Marginal conditions developing throughout the afternoon. We expect similar results there in Windy Pass, IFR to MVFR. IFR probably fairly widespread around Isabel Pass throughout the day. Mentasta Pass, marginal conditions. Tanita Pass also looking marginal. IFR to start in Portage Pass, leaning over to MVFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see IFR really most of the day. The freezing levels show the next wave is bringing in some warmer weather across the central and eastern chain, but notice that cold layer of air is descended all the way across southwestern Alaska now, all of the interior, and hovering right over southeast with levels between 2, 4, and about 6,000 feet for most of the region. So levels are certainly coming down a little bit for many locations. Icing potential has some hot spots there across the Yukon Delta, all the way out toward the Gulf of Anadyr and wrapping around low pressure. Those levels will generally be at or above 5,000 feet. They're a little lower across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, around 2,000 feet, and then coming up to 3,000 to 5,000 feet across the eastern interior down toward Prince William Sound. And then most of southeast we expect to see at least some isolated moderate above 5,000 to about 7,000 feet for most of the panhandle there. As you look at the jet stream, a ridge of high pressure sits across the eastern Pacific. That's guiding in a southwesterly flow right into southeastern Alaska. And the levels there around 110 knots or so. We have a small little jet streak around 50 knots across Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula. And you'll notice this kind of bump out here. This is a ridge that's kind of working its way into the Chukchi Sea. Levels there around 50 knots or so. But the main impact is still this persistent west and southwesterly flow coming in around the base of low pressure for the western Bering Sea, and that is pushing a lot of wind into western Alaska at 95 knots or so. At 9,000 feet, you can see the results of that down below, a south and westerly flow stretching over the Bering Sea. This is a pretty decent fetch, and at this level, it's pushing a lot of moisture and storms into the west coast and then riding them from south to north into the Bering Strait. Wind speeds there about 30 to 45 knots, southwesterly flow at southeast, over southeast, and light winds generally across the interior at this level. You see a little bit more of a northerly flow at 3,000 feet, 10 knots there, still light. Southwesterlies across southeastern Alaska, 20 to 40 knots, and there's our broad west and southwesterly flow over the Bering and the west coast, anywhere from 40 to about 55 knots, 60 knots across some parts in the western Bering. Turbulence then is going to focus along that boundary for the west coast, St. Matthew all the way down to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, the Alaska Peninsula, and westward, St. Paul and St. George, St. Matthew, all included below about 4,000 to 5,000 feet. Watch for chop across southeast, considerable moderate there, and convection below 6,000 feet.
In Valdez, all the waves were locally generated. Tremendous land movement during the quake initially caused the water to literally stand up and collapse into town. Then, 93 million cubic yards of glacial deposits under the dock area slumped and generated a 30 to 40 foot wave. Freddie Christopherson, then 13, described what he saw.
Danny Feeks and I went down on the dock to see the boat and load, and then we were leaving. Earthquake started, and then Danny and I ran. I looked back and I saw the boat go up, then it took off, and then I saw the dock go up, and then we kept running up to Stiff's Waters. I got a ride with some guy in a pan, and we went out to 6 Mile Hill. Then we waited for a while. Then we went back in.
4 decades later, that memory remains burned into Fred Christopherson's soul.
It was the biggest, blackest wave that I had ever seen. I was turning around watching it with my little buddy hollering at me up the road here, "Run, run, don't look, run."
I looked back and I saw the ship. It was about 30 feet out of the water, and the stern was in the air, and the bow was pointing right down into the water, and I could see the prop slowly turning and water coming off of it.
Great big crevasse opened up, and I didn't know if I was going to make it.
The longshoremen and the visitors that were on the dock running this way, trying to get to the shore, and it broke away from the shore, and they ran this way to go to the boat to look for some protection, and there just wasn't any protection. They just, finally the dock all busted up and they all disappeared, never to be seen again.
They were gone in just a moment.
I just couldn't imagine the people that were on the dock and what they, the last minutes of their lives and how they must have suffered knowing what was going to happen.
A short time later, at the far end of Port Valdez, the Chute Bay glacial moraine above and below the waterline avalanched and collapsed into the bay. It generated a 220-foot wave. It was the tallest wave recorded anywhere during the '64 quake. Delbert Ferrier and his father were in a skiff a short distance away when the monster passed by.
That's when I saw it wipe out, take all the concrete off the light, wipe that out, and go over the top of that little island and go in front of us, and it was starting to break on top. So, but we were just getting the big rollers. We were going up and down, you know, not knowing what the hell was going to happen. And that just missed us. We got more of the roller part. Had we been back there, well, you know, it was gone.
By the time this wave reached Valdez, it was still 40 feet high, but it did the greatest damage to the town. In the years following the disaster, Valdez was rebuilt on more solid ground about 3 miles away. Tsunamis are created by the sudden displacement of water, usually caused by very powerful earthquakes that violently change the elevation of the seafloor. Tsunamis also can be caused by above or underwater landslides, which are often generated by earthquakes. Though far less likely, tsunamis may also be caused by the eruption of submarine volcanoes, meteor impacts, or nuclear explosions. When a tsunami is generated in the open ocean, the water is so deep that the wave is barely detectable, maybe no more than a foot high at the surface. But it can travel across the ocean at jetliner speeds of 500 to 600 miles per hour. As that same wave reaches shallower water, it will slow down to about 1/10 of the speed and may grow more than 10 times in height. If the lower part of the wave reaches shore first, the incoming surge may actually be preceded by water flowing out to sea, exposing the ocean bottom or emptying channels and even huge bays. Most think that a tsunami appears as an enormous cresting wave, but in fact, most tsunamis come in as a fast-moving surge of water, like a monster high tide in fast motion. In addition to the 1964 tsunamis, 2 other tsunami events in Alaska stand out. In 1958, the highest tsunami recorded in modern history occurred in Lituya Bay in southeast Alaska. An earthquake dislodged a huge chunk of a mountain, which crashed into the bay. The impact created a wave that splashed 1,700 feet up a mountainside, completely denuding a slope of all trees and soil. One fisherman was killed when the wave swept his boat out to sea. In 1946, a strong earthquake in the Aleutian Islands that probably generated an underwater landslide created a huge tsunami that wiped out the Scotch Cap Lighthouse, perched 40 feet above sea level. 5 people were killed. This same wave traveled silently and undetected across the Pacific Ocean to the Hawaiian Islands, where it killed another 159 unsuspecting people. It was this disaster that led to the formation of the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center.
The U.S. National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program is the educational program in which communities are advised that they in fact live in an area in which tsunamis might be expected sometime in the future to attack, and to educate the population that in fact there may not be much warning time.
In this particular program, it's a partnership between three agencies, U.S. Geological Survey, seismologists expertise, NOAA, which is oceanographic expertise, and FEMA, which is mitigation expertise. So those are the three partners that are working on the federal side. On the state side is the 5 states affected. That's Alaska and Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, and California.
Here at UAF, at the Geophysical Institute, we are involved in 3 of the aspects of this national program. Those consist of warning, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. The warning aspect that we participate in, it uses seismology.
At the Geophysical Institute, scientists monitor earthquake data from several hundred seismic sensing stations across Alaska. When a seismic disturbance occurs, this data is instantly transmitted to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska. Scientists on 24-hour call quickly analyze that data, along with data from their own network of sensors, and decide whether or not they should issue a tsunami warning.
When we see a large earthquake has occurred and it's occurred near the coast, we'll issue a warning to those who could be affected by the wave within a certain amount of time. And then we'll monitor the wave to see if it really was dangerous or not, and if it was dangerous, then we'll expand the warning to all the people that it may be dangerous for.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
On to your sea ice update now for this 7th of November. The Beaufort sea ice is filling in fairly quickly. We're seeing a little more growth on the western edge of this from Point Barrow and Utqiagvik northward, and we're not seeing a whole lot of changes here in the protected areas of Norton Bay to Norton Sound, the northern end of the Yukon Delta around Amonic. But as winds back off just a little bit, maybe in the next day or so, you'll see a little more growth. But another round of southerly winds is coming in, followed by another push of westerly winds. And so what we have left is kind of a sloshing around of the ice here across that western northern edge for now. For the very latest forecast and analysis, you head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice anytime. Here's a look at southeast now. As winds in the front are coming in, look for south and easterly winds gusting up to 40 knots inside of Stevens Passage. There's southerlies in the Lynn Canal with 5-foot seas. Across the outer coast, a south and southeasterly flow, 25 to 30. Look for 10 to 12-foot seas expected throughout the region. As we get into Friday, a westerly wind coming into the outer coast, 25 knots in all areas, anywhere from 12 to 15-foot seas expected. Southerlies return to the inside passage, 15 knots with 3-foot seas there for Friday. So Friday's looking a little bit better. Across Cook Inlet on Thursday, northerlies coming down the northern half, but west and southwesterly winds building in from the Barrens all the way up through Clam Gulch. Outside of the Barrens, look for a north and northwesterly flow there, 30 to 40 knots. Southeasterlies outside of Hitchinbrook Entrance, northerlies inside of Prince William Sound tomorrow with a 4-foot sea. But again, some pretty strong winds out there in the northern Gulf tonight. That should improve. As we get into Friday, continued improvement. Winds diminish to 15 to 25 knots in just about all areas. 10 knots across the northern Cook Inlet region. 3-foot seas there. 2-foot seas inside of Prince William Sound with a 15-knot wind. And westerlies coming across the Barrens and into Kamishak Bay and Kashamak Bay for that matter for your Friday. Here's a look at Thursday inside of Bristol Bay. Southerlies there with a 5-foot sea. Southerlies building in down the Bering Sea coast as well. 10-foot seas there north of Cold Bay. Southwesterlies south of Sand Point. Northwesterlies from Akiak all the way down toward Perryville. And more of a westerly flow coming over Kodiak Island. 7-foot seas to 11-foot seas on either side of the island. As you get into Friday, those strong winds we see out in the west are dampening out just a little bit. You'll get more of a southwest wind coming up the Bering Sea coast at 25 knots with 10 to 17-foot seas. Southwesterlies inside of Shelikof Strait for Friday with a 5-foot sea on a 20-knot wind and 15 to 20-knot winds across the North Pacific with 7 to 8-foot seas there along the coast. For Thursday, obviously, this catches your eye. The highest seas and the strongest winds will be well out over the open and western Bering Sea. Some of those, though, will be at storm force at least. Westerlies coming across the central and western chain, and you're just getting clipped with some of those higher seas, anywhere from 12-foot seas in the east to about 22 to 23-foot seas in the west, 30 to 35 knots sustained, and 25 to 30 knots across the Pacific coast with 10 to 11-foot seas there on Thursday. Considerably better conditions there as we get into Friday in the open waters anyway. 25 to 30 knots continue across most of the chain with 18 to 20-foot seas in the east, 17 to 20-foot seas in the west, and winds come down to about 10 knots and 7-foot seas on the south side of the eastern chain as we get into your Friday. Now, where is all that wind going? A south wind will continue up the west coast as we get into Thursday, 30 to 35 knots in most areas. Seas coming up to 25 feet around St. Matthew, 18 feet around St. Paul and St. George, and southeasterlies with 11-foot seas there around St. Lawrence Island, 5-foot seas inside of Norton Sound. You can see some of that high seas starts to make its way into St. Paul and St. George, 22-foot seas there on Friday, 19 to 24-foot seas around St. Matthew, then north of Nunivak Island, south into Kuskokwim Delta, 16-foot seas there, 19-foot seas north of Hooper Bay to St. Lawrence Island, and southerlies with a 5-foot sea in Norton Sound. For Thursday, watch for a light westerly flow across the Beaufort seacoast and over the ice. Southeasterlies moving offshore from the Chukchi seacoast. 3 to 4-foot seas expected there. And then a stronger offshore wind for Friday, 20 to 25 knots with 7-foot seas expected. Light northerlies around Utqiagvik, and then a very light breeze over the ice for the central and eastern Beaufort seacoast. Recapping tonight's weather, a winter weather advisory has been posted for the Haines Highway in Haines and the Klondike Highway. For the Haines region, look for about 4 to 6 inches of snow. A winter weather advisory until noon tomorrow. 6 p.m. will be the cutoff for the Klondike Highway. You could see as much as 6 to 10 inches of snow. A front's moving in. It looks like most of the snow will stay north of Juneau. South of that, though, it's all rain. Look for an area of low pressure to bring in some light snow around South Central and the Anchorage area. Most areas will see about maybe an inch or so. A strong front is moving across the Bering once again. That means strong southerly winds out ahead of that for the west coast of Alaska. Snow is ending and winter storm warnings in the northwest will be done by tomorrow morning. And then a strong westerly surge moves across the Bering. We'll be watching for the possibility of coastal erosion and high surf as we get into Thursday and Friday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal, pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.